IB Environmental students. Today we're going to be talking about cycles. This is all one objective, so you won't see different objectives in the title. Do your best to jot down as much as you can, and we'll be applying this in class. All right, let's begin. First, let's talk about what we mean by a cycle. A cycle is the process by which a molecule, a piece of matter, moves through both living and non-living storages within Earth. And we can draw those flows through a diagram. And we're going to talk about three major cycles: water, carbon, and nitrogen. So I would organize your notes depicting which one you're talking about. Okay, let's begin. Let's first talk about the water cycle. The water cycle is driven by the sun because the sun's energy is able to transform the state of matter, changing it from gas to liquid or liquid to gas and so forth. And this is very interesting because in different places within an ecosystem, there are storages of living organisms that might have water, and there's also abiotic factors, just like the ocean and so forth, that will also contain a lot of water, which we could call a storage too. So let's go through it step by step now. So here's the non-living part. We're going to start with the fact that water vapor from the atmosphere can condense from its gaseous form to a liquid form, and when it does so, it will precipitate out of the atmosphere and fall onto the Earth's surface in the form of a liquid or a solid, liquid rain or solid snow. And then water has this ability, once it hits the surface or the ground, to infiltrate or trickle through the land, okay? Right through the soil to deeper parts of the soil. Additionally, if the ground becomes saturated, meaning there's no more air pockets for water to go in and it's all very watery, some of the water then will stay on top of the land and it'll flow or run away from that area and off into the ocean. So we call it runoff. Last but not least, if there's a lot of sun and a lot of energy, the liquid form of water in the ocean or any other big non-living storage place, that liquid form will evaporate and form a gas again if there's enough energy, and that's evaporation. Wonderful. Now, water can also be in living things. Specifically, let's focus in on plants first. And this focus, we're going to talk about the fact that water, when it's in the soil, can be absorbed through roots. That's one way water can flow or transfer. Additionally, water can flow or transform from a liquid water in the plant to a gaseous form evaporating out of the plant through the process of transpiration. Students usually forget about this one. It is, in a way, how plants sweat, how water evaporates off of the leaves of the plants. And we'll see here that's in the blue arrows. It is very common for there to be a lot of evaporation or transpiration in a place that is very humid, right? That's what the humidity in the air is. Lots of water vapor. Okay, now you don't have to write these questions. Just listen and check. Do you think you could understand these? And even maybe use them before a test or an exam to study. Okay. Do you think you could discuss how humans might have impacted this cycle? Maybe have we taken a lot of water out of particular storage, or maybe increased the energy that might make the process go quicker or slower? Would you be able to justify how farmers might be able to be impacted by this cycle, or why they even care about it? Do you think you could explain why the sun is the main energy driver for this process? If so, wonderful, you're on the right track. If not, maybe go back and revisit some of these things. Now we're going to move on to the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is a little bit more complex than the water cycle, so do this slowly. Or we're going to start with photosynthesis, which we know our producers or plants do. And through this process, they'll take carbon in the form of CO2, which is a gas, out of the atmosphere, and they'll form sugars or glucose. And that sugar will be used and consumed by other organisms. Plants, when they're doing this, they're doing primary productivity, which we know will form organic molecules or biomass. They are forming carbon atoms in their own body. We also know that the process of cellular respiration is something that all organisms do. And in this process, they will in turn release carbon dioxide back into the environment. So it'll flow back into the atmosphere as a storage. All organisms do this, not just animals, even plants do cellular respiration. Don't forget that respiration and photosynthesis are opposite processes. Next, the process of decomposition, usually done by decomposers, right, is the process by which organisms are broken down and recycled. That organic matter that's being broken down, during that process, a lot of carbon is going to be released into the atmosphere. So more decomposition, more carbon being able to be released into the atmosphere. Furthermore, when a lot of things have decomposed into the soil, over time, there will be a lot of heat and pressure, and this compaction could form, over millions of years, fossil fuels, such as coal or oil. These fossil fuels, since they're compact through pressure, time, and heat, they are really, really dense, rich forms of carbon sinks and storages. More than maybe we would think about even believing in, but it is true. These carbon fossil fuels have the most dense amounts of carbon out there. But combustion, whether it's is the burning of potential carbon storages, whether it's just a plant who over photosynthesis has stored some carbon, or even fossil fuels that have really dense amounts of carbon. This burning releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And since we burn fossil fuels more today than we've ever done before, there are way more higher amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than previously in our history on this planet. Another thing about carbon is that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has this ability to diffuse or enter the ocean in a gaseous form. So there are bubbles in the water. Those bubbles could be carbon, not just oxygen. And the interesting thing is that the ocean is one of the largest carbon holders out there, even more often larger than a forest. And because there's so much in the ocean, a lot of marine organisms use that CO2 to make shells in the form of limestone, right? A lot of those shells over time will compact into limestone. And over time, those limestone rocks, which are those pieces of shells, they can erode away through the process of erosion, and as they're broken down, they re-release out the carbon that was originally stored by those marine organisms. So there's this cycle even within the ocean itself of taking in carbon dioxide and then re-releasing it. And because of this process, there's a change over time with the amount of acidity in the water, and we'll talk about this. This is called ocean acidification. Check in with yourself if you think you would be able to answer these questions. If not, I would go back and see if you could revisit the previous slides in the podcast. All right, next is the toughest one, the nitrogen cycle. One of the most unique things is that the nitrogen is the majority of the Earth's atmosphere. It is over 70%, 78% to be exact. We humans are very selfish and we think it's only oxygen because that's what we breathe in, but that's not true. It's majority nitrogen. But that gaseous form in the atmosphere is in the form of N2 gas, but we can't even access that as humans. We can't use that form of nitrogen. So nitrogen is usually considered a limiting factor in an ecosystem because most of the nitrogen out there in the environment is not even usable, this N2 gas form. 78% not even usable. Oh, so sad. Okay, so how does this cycle work? This is hard, so we will practice this in class. There are 5 major parts. We're going to go through each of them in turn. The first part, fixation. Nitrogen gas, this unusable N2 form, can be fixed and converted into a usable form such as ammonia. And usually this fixation will be done by bacteria. Thankfully, some roots of different plants like beans or legumes, those roots have this wonderful bacteria in a symbiotic relationship, and that will help us fix that nitrogen into a usable form. Farmers love using these as crop plants. Other thing is randomly, lightning strikes sometimes make this unusable form into a usable form. So this is fixing it We're fixing nitrogen into a usable form. The next part, nitrogen also can be fixed or changed into ammonia through the process of ammonification. I understand that this sounds like almost exactly like the previous slide, and if you ask me, it pretty much is the same. So the difference is these bacteria are decomposers, and in the process they're taking the dead organisms or the organism's waste and turning it into ammonia. Has the word ammonification in it. Taking the unusable form, changing it into a usable form. See this poop and food and stuff, breaking it down into a usable form. Next, we have nitrification. So once again, we're taking this ammonia that's semi-usable, and we're taking it and putting it into an even more usable form, nitrite and nitrates. All right, once again, bacteria are going to do this. Usually they're in the soil. In an aquatic system, they're going to be bacteria that just are floating around in the water, and they'll turn this ammonia into a more usable form, nitrate or nitrates. The next one is, how does it get into us organisms that need it now that it's usable? So animals will assimilate it by eating something else, like those legumes, those bean plants, or eating another organism that had nitrogen in it. Plants will absorb the usable nitrogen forms through their roots from the soil. All right, sometimes they'll get it from that nitrate form, and sometimes they'll be able to get it from the ammonium form. But overall, why did we need it? Why do we need nitrogen? Well, nitrogens are proteins in our DNA, and we really need those two things. So we somehow need to get a usable form that's not the gas form and that's the major form. Our second and last guy, we have this denitrification. How then does sometimes the nitrogen get back into the atmosphere? Well, this is usually will happen when we die. Other types of bacteria will turn it back into that unusable form, which needs to have oxygen around for this to occur. So this part we're not super psyched about as humans, because this is turning it back into the unusable form, turning it back, returning back to that nitrogen unusable form. All right, so let's check in. Nitrogen cycle kind of sucks, I would agree. So we will practice this a lot in class. See if you could be able to explain why we need to do nitrogen fixation. See if you could explain why we care that there's bacteria involved. See if you can describe how farmers use different types of plants to help this nitrogen fixation. And see if you can relate this to legumes. And these last two are very related. All right, you made it. I know it was kind of tough. The cycles are hard, but you made it. So we'll apply this in class, and good job for doing your podcast. Awesome.